Hello, welcome to the April meeting of the District 23 Zonta Says NOW think tank, which will soon become the Australian think tank. Please remember to keep your microphone on mute during the presentations and ask any questions in the chat line. So let's get started. Firstly, I'd like to point out that numbers are a bit down today as there are marches around Australia to spur the government to take more action to stop violence against women. On average, 1 woman a week was killed by domestic violence last year, and this year, 1 woman is murdered every 4 days. I've received many apologies from members who are looking forward to seeing the recording from today's meeting. Firstly, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in all the places that we meet on today, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. At each meeting, we like to acknowledge a female Aboriginal leader, and today we acknowledge the 2024 Senior Australian of the Year, Yalmay Yunupingu from the Northern Territory. Yalmay is a teacher and linguist who's guided teaching at the Yirrkala Bilingual School for 4 decades. She teaches children in their local language at school, and then they learn English as their second language. This helps to increase their confidence when learning, and she's been very successful. We all know why Zonta Says Now to gender equal climate action and how we are trying to stop the train of events that leads to gender inequality. We know that greenhouse gas emissions are going into the atmosphere where they are accumulating, forming a blanket around the planet and causing global heating and associated extreme weather events. Extreme heat, droughts, fires, floods and storms trigger social disruption, causing millions of people to lose their livelihoods and homes. And it's this social disruption that magnifies any existing inequality, including gender inequality. Zonta Says Now stops the train by advocating for governments to meet their obligations under the Paris Climate Agreement and closing the gender gaps in education, health, economic opportunity and safety. Studies have shown the links between extreme heat and rising domestic violence. For example, a Yale University study found that when there was a 1 degree Celsius increase in the average annual temperature, there was a more than 6% rise in physical and sexual domestic violence. In Madrid, researchers found the risk of intimate partner femicide rose by 40% in a heat wave. And UNICEF's report highlights that for every 10% increase or decrease in rainfall, there is a 1% increase in child marriage. So if there's a 20% increase in rainfall, it's a 2% increase in child marriage. For example, Pakistan halved the prevalence of child marriage over the past 2 decades, but the intense rainfall and flooding in 2022 erased 5 years of progress. But it's the people behind the numbers who put the fire in our bellies. In Sudan, Dabor, aged 9, must walk further each day looking for food, water and wood in her drought-affected country. There's no time for her to go to school anymore, and she no longer dreams of being a teacher. In Mozambique, Ayan is 11, and she's frightened as she's being sold into marriage as her family lost everything in recent floods and are now destitute. And they need to sell her into marriage to feed the rest of the family. In Canada, Judith, aged 42, has a daughter, Claire, aged 7, and Claire has severe asthma that's made worse by wildfire smoke. Judith is losing income as she must stay home to care for Claire, and she worries that she may lose her job. And in Australia, Maria, aged 79, walks to the local library to find relief from extreme heat as she cannot afford air conditioning in her rented apartment. She has a heart condition and worries about how she will financially, physically, and mentally survive the hot summer. In Nigeria, Ralia, 33, saw her entire market washed away in the floods, taking away her livelihood, and she worries how she will feed her children. And in Germany, Freya was made homeless in the floods. She's lived in temporary shelter for 2 years and is desperately waiting to have a permanent home again. These stories are repeated around the world, which is why Zonta Says Now seeks climate justice for women and girls, so they can prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from the impacts of climate change on the same basis as men. And we do this by taking gender equal climate action locally, nationally, and internationally. Well, today we've got a great speaker, so I'll ask Sue Lees from Melbourne on Yarra to introduce Dr. Diane Kraal. I gather that you're going to be interviewing her, so that sounds like fun. Over to you, Sue.
Okay, thanks, Carol. Some of the apologies are also for some of these people here at the Bush Cushion Stuffing, who the target is 200 this afternoon, so they're kind of up there doing that, and I'm here. So Diane spoke to Zonta Says Now in October 2022. So some of you might remember that Diane spoke about her research into how taxation could be used to support an uptake in electric vehicles, particularly car fleets, and also about her attendance at COPs over the years. And today we're very fortunate to welcome back Diane, Dr. Diane Kraal, who is now going to talk to us about one of her later ventures, which is actually built on from what she talked about to us originally. So today Diane's going to talk about the book she has co-authored, A Just Transition to Decarbonisation, and it's part of the Just Transitions. Oops, it does help if I hold it up the right way.
Nice.
The Just Transition series, published by Palgrave Macmillan and available. I had a look through Amazon and Booktopia, which are pretty popular, and I think probably some other sources as well. Very easy to read. An academic work, but very easy to read. So Diane's chapter in the book is about transport. The other chapters are based on the COP themes of loss and damage, transport, nature and youth, and basically delves into climate, energy, environmental and humanitarian justice. So the co-authors of this book are members of Monash University, but the book has actually come from Diane's work as a member of the Energy Justice and Social Contract Project at the University of Pau and des Pays de l'Adour in France, and has meant that Diane and I are both learning U3A French together. So the book is very important for us to learn about as well, because it clearly discusses the importance of climate change being treated as a humanitarian issue and also an economic, political, social, legal considerations. So we can use the information from this book basically to help us also in our quest to make the argument about gender justice in terms of climate change. So it's really important for us, I think, to understand this book, and because it's a very well authored academic work, I think it's high on our list of considerations. So we're going to actually have an interview. I'm going to interview Diane about the book so that hopefully you'll get an idea of the book itself and the main themes and issues within the book. So let's start, Diane, with, as the co-author, why did you do this? Why did you undertake this endeavour, and what's the goal of the book?
Okay, thanks very much, Sue and everyone, and it's great to be here to talk about the co-authored book. The goal of our book is to explore the urgent need for a just transition to achieve the goal of decarbonisation. And our chapter themes have been drawn from recently held United Nations climate change conferences. And the book's themes are loss and damage, transport, nature and youth. Now, we could have certainly included gender, but the book's themes reflect the expertise of the various authors, but certainly the impact on gender issues could well have been, a chapter in this book. But nonetheless, the book has sought to capture the justice process as societies move towards a decarbonised economy, and our book delves into climate action through climate justice, energy justice, and environmental justice.
Okay, so can you explain what a just transition actually means, like its different meanings and why that's important?
Sure. Okay. So a just transition has been defined as transitioning away from fossil fuels towards a more just future to alleviate past social inequalities. So whether it be, in areas of transport or gendered type issues. It is acknowledged that there are mixed meanings of a just transition for scholars of climate justice, environmental justice, and energy justice. A just transition to achieve decarbonisation covers all these different perspectives. So therefore, climate justice is about sharing the benefits and burdens of climate change from a human rights perspective, whereas environmental justice aims to treat citizens equally, whether they be male or female or dispossessed peoples, equally in the development of policies and laws. And by contrast, energy justice, which is my specific area, concerns the application of human rights across the entire energy life cycle. For instance, it has got a large body of theory that covers 5 justice principles: distributive, recognition, procedural, cosmopolitan, and restorative.
So with the COP process, there was a just transition work program at COP28 in Dubai. What does that mean?
Okay, so the Just Transition Work Program is actually not covered by our book, but it's very topical, so I'll just touch on it a little bit. So the program aims to facilitate countries' just transitions to low emissions and a climate resilient future through actions that also contribute to reducing inequalities within and between countries. The Just Transition Work Program is set to encourage conversations between countries and other stakeholders, such as policymakers, non-government organisations such as Zonta, and local communities to devise more effective ways of realising just transitions in the socio-economic and environmental sphere. And it's got 5 principles. First of all, it must first and foremost champion a people-centred approach. It must address global inequality and reject oppressive global systems. It needs unconditional support from developed countries, such as the US, Australia, the UK, etc. It must create comprehensive and flexible just transition pathways. And finally, the Just Transition Work Program must build synergies with other global climate-related activities.
Wow, a big task. So in terms of that Just Transition Work Program, let's unpack the issue of loss and damage, which is a chapter in the book. How significant was progress on this at COP27 and 28? We know that there's a few problems there. Where is it significant, and what's missing and what needs to happen next in terms of loss and damage?
Okay, thanks, Sue. So as part of our book's chapter 2, Climate Justice and Concept of Loss and Damage in Climate Negotiations, what was covered was the agreement to a loss and damage fund at the UN Climate Change Conference in Egypt in 2022, which was COP27. It was an important moment in the global climate justice movement. Loss and damage formally addresses the fundamental injustice underlying climate negotiations, which is that countries least responsible for carbon emissions are bearing the heaviest burdens from climate change and have not, until now received adequate assistance from those most responsible, in other words, developed countries. So the UN Climate Change Conference in Dubai in 2023 saw the establishment of a loss and damage fund through startup pledges from various nations, but the financial pledges were far too low to properly address the real cost of loss and damage suffered by developing countries. There needs to be between $100 and $580 billion pledged.
You're certainly covering some whopping issues.
Mm.
So chapter 3 was your chapter about transport. You looked at Australia, but you're also asking the wider questions that relate to international experience from the Australian experience. What are those wider questions? What are they in terms of subsidy? And what does all this mean to the ordinary consumer?
Okay, so just bearing in mind, our book is holistic. It's not, we all work together through the various chapters with the introduction and also the conclusion. But in any case, chapter 3, zero emissions transport, taxation support for business electric cars, was where we sought to address the need for lower carbon emissions from cars. So transport in Australia is responsible to the extent of 20% of carbon emissions here. The EU is not far off. Their figure is 25%. And for instance, the UK is 26% in terms of transport emissions. So in July 2022, Australia removed its fringe benefits tax from company-provided electric vehicles. This came after intense lobbying to the government for tax-free EVs in order to boost their uptake. Unfortunately, the tax-free policy also applies to business petrol-fueled SUVs. Now, many have argued there should not be a tax break for, these petrol cars. However, politicians see tradespeople with SUVs as an important constituency and did not remove the tax break from their petrol cars. Anyway, as a result of the July 2022 legislation, some revenue from fringe benefits tax will be lost to government, but this is balanced by the fact that older electric vehicle fleet cars can eventually be sold to the public as second-hand vehicles and help, again, boost that uptake. The car debate raging at the moment in Australia concerns vehicle emission standards, and some of you may, have seen references in the press. The UK and EU have strict emission standards, but the emission rules in place in Australia today date back to 2009, which have been superseded in Europe a decade ago. Emission standard Euro 6D will be introduced in Australia in 2025, and car makers are still arguing the point that if emission standards are introduced in Australia, it will affect the importing of cars to Australia, and there will be other cost risks. So there is still a scare campaign going on. We're still miles behind and we need to do more.
So let's turn to the nature chapters. So again, mentioning that you looked through the Australian lens and looking at the wider relevance, and this time it's about First Nations knowledge, and that is actually particularly interesting for us because we've recently had a speaker, Zonta Says NOW, who was a First Nations woman. So can you talk about things like offsetting nature-based solutions in relation to First Nations context, First Nations rights?
No problem. So as per our book chapter 4, Water is Life, Recognising First Nations in Sustainable Water Management and Use, we begin with the Water Act, which is a federal act which recognises the important role of Indigenous people in water management and use by providing a mandated Indigenous position on the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, which is responsible for the Murray-Darling water system that runs through 4 states and territories in Australia. So the Federal Water Act provides for integrated management of basin water resources. By contrast, the states' legislations vary. There is no uniformity. in respect to First Nations peoples' sustainable water management and use. So, for example, in my state in Victoria, First Nations peoples have the right to take and use water if they have an agreement under the Traditional Owner Settlement Act. Further, Victoria released its First Nations water policy in 2022 called Water is Life, Traditional Owner Access to Water. And the policy roadmap has two sections. So first of all, Section A contains the Victorian Government policy position, and Section B consists of water policy statements made by First Nations peoples. And in particular, Section B is important because it contains the vision for First Nations peoples on water justice. So in all, Chapter 4 recounts how the ineffectiveness of Australia's cultural heritage protection legislation was exposed when, in May 2020, Rio Tinto destroyed the Juukan Gorge in WA, a significant site dating back more than 46,000 years. And the destruction of the Juukan Gorge precipitated a parliamentary inquiry. And I don't need to go any further into that. Most of us have followed that issue. So more needs to be done. That's the point.
So next, let's talk about the chapter on the issue of how free trade agreements can be utilised in terms of climate action. Do developments like the EU Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which has the great title of CBAM,
okay.
Goes against the grain of equity and justice.
Okay. CBAM, which is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, is about the EU acting to stop cheap imports of high carbon emission goods and products from companies in non-EU countries by charging those companies with a tariff. So high carbon emission goods include iron, steel, cement, fertilizers, aluminium, fossil fuel activity, hydrogen, and some chemicals. It hardly affects Australia at all because we sell raw materials like iron ore and gas. So it doesn't really affect us much. So the question is, does CBAM or CBAM go against the grain of equity and justice? And I think not. CBAM will make non-EU carbon-intensive products less attractive compared to EU-made greener products. And there are still jobs in making green products from renewable energy. So as per our book, Chapter 5, Utilising Free Trade Agreements to Protect Nature and Heritage, it embodies a different approach to CBAM. The chapter proposes using free trade agreements to address the implications of extracting and trading in fossil fuels such as coal. Coal has a huge negative impact on climate change and biodiversity. In the Australian context, our book recounts the harm done to the Great Barrier Reef in terms of coral bleaching as a result of CO2 emissions from the burning of coal. The chapter covers the inclusion of non-trade provisions to address these biodiversity issues. And our chapter covers the mounting pressure on the ever-increasing number of free trade agreements concluded by states on a bilateral and multilateral basis.
So another chapter is on youth empowerment. Why is this important? I think that's very close to home for a lot of us.
Okay, so our final chapter on youth empowerment. So this was chapter 6. It was entitled Youth Empowerment for a Just Transition. And it's all about us seeing youth as potentially powerful advocates for climate justice and the key to unlocking a just transition to a low carbon economy. However, they must be empowered as custodians of the future. So youth will be empowered through education, training, and public participation, foundational to achieving climate action. It is important to hold governments to account both now and into the future in terms of giving a voice to youth. Today's youth will take their place as the next generation of leaders, managers, decision makers, and voters. And as mentioned in our chapter, the program Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE, is a crucial component program of the Paris Agreement, and it must be addressed by all UN member countries. So ACE, Action for Climate Empowerment, offers vital avenues for empowering youth in the pursuit of climate justice, and coming times will reveal whether ACE can secure the necessary funding and coordination within a reasonable time frame.
So important. So let's bring this conversation home by talking about your conclusions. What are your thoughts for the future, such as how strategies can be employed at different levels, battles still to be fought, and how justice is really inseparable from wider climate goals?
Okay, so I'll just run through a chapter by chapter basis very briefly, what they were about and the future. So chapter 2 was all about arguing for the creation of a loss and damage fund with the purpose of providing support and assistance to vulnerable countries. And it demonstrates a first move towards recognising climate justice. For the future, even though in 2023 in Dubai, there was a call for a loss and development fund, and there, it was a step towards justice. It is a very small step. It remains unclear at this juncture how the loss and damage fund will be effectively implemented and administered, particularly in the absence of an agreed definition of what loss and damage is. Chapter 3 on transport argues about more taxation support in Australia is necessary to achieve zero emissions transport, with a focus on zero emission cars in business fleets. Now, for the future, the Australian Government's National Electric Vehicle Strategy 2023 is designed to increase the uptake of EVs and introduce emission standards. This strategy will be a test of whether new policy will result and lead to effective legislation. Chapter 4 on the nature theme argues that First Nations peoples' water knowledge be recognised in Australia's water law and policy for a just transition to decarbonisation. In terms of the future, recognition of First Nations peoples' water knowledge is still a very small and fragile step, as a shift in policy has not yet been translated into meaningful legislative reform, thus making knowledge vulnerable to changing political priorities. Chapter 5 on the theme of nature questions whether free trade agreements could or should be utilised in redressing the harm inflicted by climate change upon the natural environment. And for the future, we see that free trade agreements have a potential to play an important role in a just transition, but this transition cannot be seen as just without adequate place and recognition being given to First Nations peoples. And finally, Chapter 6 centred on empowering youth and how it is supported through the Paris Agreement's ACE, or Action for Climate Empowerment program. So for the future, the effectiveness of the youth voice depends on the ability of member parties of the UN to get finance and monitor ACE through their own national action plans.
So thank you, Diane. What an amazing area to be involved in, and we really thank you for giving your expertise. But now I'll open it to questions and I think comments, because I think people might have a number of comments. Like Carol, I know that you put in your submission into the idea of legislation of children, the government being responsible for
Duty of care bill, yeah.
People, duty of care.
Yeah. No, thanks, Diane. I mean, I like the multi-pronged approach of the book, because it obviously shows that, anything to address the situation with climate there's no silver bullet. It's got to be a holistic approach. Well, a couple of things I wanted to ask was, when you were doing the fringe benefit tax for tax-free EVs and the petrol vehicles were included as well, Was there
Mhm.
consideration of doing a two-tier approach? So as you would have, say, a bigger tax benefit for EVs and a smaller one for petrol vehicles?
Well, one thing with taxation, you always try and aim for simplicity. And in my submission to the government, and I even spoke before the Senate inquiry on this piece of legislation, I and other like-minded people advocated for the removal of any tax benefit for business SUV petrol cars. But
Right.
the tradespeople lobby, or the tradespeople as a group in the various electorates out there is very powerful, very strong, and there was no change, unfortunately.
Worth a go, worth a
Yeah,
go.
worth a go, worth a go. Mhm.
And when Sue mentioned earlier on that we had an Aboriginal woman speak to us last week, it was actually Professor Anne Polina, and
Mhm.
I know that she is actually on the advisory group for the Murray River Basin
Mhm.
as well. So I was really interested when you were talking about the Water Act and bringing in the voices of First Nations people into the sustainable water management and use, and
Mhm.
that was a new one to me. So I thought that was really interesting. So how can their voices be strengthened? How can do we just need to all advocate to members of parliament? What can we do in that area? Any ideas?
Okay, now it was interesting. I was at the COP in Egypt when there was talk of the fraught nature of the management of the Murray-Darling system. And there's fights from the headwaters of the system right down to South Australia about water usage, water allocation, water wastage, what the sorts of things that water is applied to, the growing of cotton and rice. And so the politicians seem so caught up in their own electorates and very, very powerful concerns on the Murray-Darling Basin that the Indigenous voice is hardly heard. And there was an Indigenous spokesperson at the Australian Pavilion for the COP in Egypt, and he said they're trying. They need more support for an Indigenous voice with regard to the Murray-Darling Basin. So there's already these pretty intense fights going on. You keep reading about it in the papers, it keeps popping up, and Indigenous voices need to be heard, and they need support. Unfortunately, the referendum was lost for an Indigenous voice to Parliament, so it seems to be like backpedaling for a while, but certainly, the traditional management of the Murray-Darling Basin needs to be considered.
Right. Okay. I don't want to hog the floor. Does anybody else want a question?
Yep.
Vicky.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane. That's fascinating. I'm not sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was there any approach on with climate action incorporating slow and cool burns of vegetation in regards to trying to reduce the wildfire possibility, with increased temperatures? Did that come across your brief at all?
No, because I guess the themes we selected, like there's quite a range of themes in the COP, and we just decided to choose themes based on our expertise. But I know what you're referring to, but no, we didn't cover it in the book.
So Christine and then Janice.
So thanks, Sue. Thanks, Diane, for your presentation. I'm itching to read the book now. Look, I was going to, I'll say two things. One quickly on water. Listening to you, I thought, well, the Water Act, the Federal Water Act came about because the states all agreed to concede our authority to the Commonwealth to enact that legislation. So I'm thinking, why can't we have a similar process where the states come together with First Nations representatives and agree to oh, sorry, I'm getting echo here. I'll keep going. And agree in terms of First Nations, protecting First Nations cultural heritage in their state legislation, or agree to concede power to the Commonwealth to do that. That's the first point. And secondly, I had a question about free trade agreements being used to protect nature. Is there any progress on that globally?
Okay, so first, with regard to water, I mean, currently, with the Murray-Darling Basin, it crosses Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia. Look, it's a really fraught area, and in terms of getting an Indigenous voice, that's what we tried to do, but it was defeated. So
Let's put their microphones on mute, and we'll see if we can get rid of the vibe of the thing, apart from the speaker, obviously.
Yes, so in terms of Indigenous voices, I think we're backpedaling for a little while on that issue, and hopefully Indigenous peoples will be able to regroup and cover some of these really important areas. In terms of using the free trade agreement provisions for climate action, again, that is a proposal. One author in particular has written quite extensively on the use of free trade agreements to protect heritage, and so I guess it's just a matter of getting momentum with that idea. But like Kabam, it's just another way of addressing what is a global problem.
Janice?
Hi, thanks very much, Diane. That was really great. Very, very interesting. Before you go, can you remind us of the title of your book? But that's not really my question. You may recall that recently Greg Combet, who is the chair of the Net Zero Economy Agency, gave a speech at the National Press Club in which he talked about the need to ensure that, for example, coal mine workers are supported in making what is effectively a just transition. And I think that's quite important, because it actually, if that's successful, it can provide the sort of political background to supporting other aspects of just transition that might seem onerous to the general public. I'd be interested in your comments.
Well, certainly a just transition covers situations where people in fossil fuel industries, such as the coal industry, have to transition out of that industry into renewable energy. And certainly in many parts of Australia, the push for more and more renewable energy is well underway. We see the solar panels, we see the wind turbines. I'm not a great believer in hydrogen, but apart from that, there are justice issues in making that transition, and that's what a just transition is all about. There's got to be justice in moving from one mode to another to bring about a decarbonised future. and particularly for developing countries, funding is required in order for them to make that transition. Now, Australia's a first world country. We are a developed country, and certainly, the plight of the people in the coal industry is under discussion. But I guess the same thing has happened with the timber industry. Certainly in Victoria, there's no more native timber logging, and people in that industry have had to transition out, but in a just way. So it's a theme that's repeated. I know when I was in at the COP in Poland just before COVID, I think it was 2020. There was talk about the coal miners in Poland, and there are a lot of areas in Poland where coal is mined, and they have the huge problem of transitioning these workers into different industries and thinking about what energy are we going to use apart from coal. At least in Australia, we've got the option of solar and wind.
Bridget?
Thank you, Diane, for that. It's probably a comment more than anything else. The council that I work for is at the bottom end of the Murray-Darling Basin in the Coorong. So we see all of what's going on above us, so to speak. My understanding is that in terms of cultural water, we're a long way from any sort of agreement across the states, and even in just the use of the water, with the review due in another couple of years, the states agreeing on how and where and who gets to have the water and the sale of it, is a long, long journey yet. Would you agree?
Oh yes. I actually wrote a co-authored tax paper not so long ago on advocating the taxation of water as a different way to approach this very thorny problem of over-allocation, overuse, metering problems, all sorts of things. And we thought, look, because I'm a tax person, we thought, let's just take a fresh look at this problem and just put in a different perspective. But it is a very, very fraught area, and it's a very precious resource, and that's why we're fighting over it. So water and energy are essential to how developed and developing countries. They're basic requirements for a better future, but certainly with South Australia, with the Coorong area, you are at the very end of all this fighting that's going on. It's nasty.
I would love it if you'd share that link to your paper regarding taxation. Thank you.
Yes.
Us again, and then Susan.
Good afternoon. I'm not sure if this is working sound-wise, but my question is about the current support for developing nations being touted for decarbonising transport in developing areas in our region. Diane, I wondered if you could speak to that matter, as there are significant conflicts coming our way through the media, and I wonder how we can progress decarbonisation of transport in places like Papua New Guinea and places where, it's all dependent on infrastructure like wind turbines or solar energy development, and the basic structures for decarbonised transport just aren't there.
Yeah, actually, Papua New Guinea is quite a unique case. I have been to Papua New Guinea 2 or 3 times, looking at the gas industry there. But certainly, those with the greatest share of petrol-driven transport are those that can afford it. They're the big companies, executives, etc. And it is not as if, you know, Papua New Guinea could not use wind turbines or you know, solar energy to solve its transport problems. But I think they've got more fundamental problems apart from transport. So that is a very tricky question on the list of matters that the government there needs to address.
It
And
is.
and someone else asked before that the name of the book. I don't know. There it is there. And I guess Carol and Sue will put it on the website, but there's the name of the book there, and it's available.
You can also get it online, can't
Yeah,
you?
yeah.
So
I
we'll
have a
put that
picture
in.
of it on screen when I share the screen.
Okay.
I think we've just lost Janice, who was going to ask. Oh, there you are. Did you want to ask?
I'd ask my question. I'd forgotten to take my hand down. That was all. It's down now.
Is there anybody else who'd like to make any comments or ask a question? Carol?
Just one last thing. You were talking about this, the ACE program for youth empowerment. The action. Can you tell us a little bit more about that one?
Well, basically, it's a UN-sponsored program. At the various COPs, they've been trying to get youth there into the foreground. So you've got Greta Thunberg as kind of the youth kind of leader, which is really, really important. And with say the last conference in Dubai, it was very, very hard for youth to be heard because it was expensive to go to the COP in Dubai because of accommodation. And that actually, you know, on an equity basis, it was not good. So the UN people are trying to give them a greater voice, but there are all these, you know, barriers. And this year the COP is at Azerbaijan, so I don't think, you know, that will be a big COP, and I don't think that'll be a COP a lot of youth will be going to. But at least they're making an effort to recognise and support, and it needs funding from the various members of the COP countries.
The other day I was reading an article and a young person was complaining about about youth washing, how they were bringing young people to places like the COP, parading them for photographs, and then they were just ignored. And so I thought that was just an interesting concept, and I'm hoping that the ACE program will help to obviate that trend.
Yeah, look, most definitely. And yeah, the youth are our future. You know, I'm in education. A lot of people here are in education, and they are the future. We need to give them a platform. And there was something in the paper just today and yesterday about university councils and staff and youth voices not being heard because they've got all these professional people from industry who know all about budgeting, etc. And someone was saying, well, that's the way it should be. And then someone else wrote in saying, well, no, there needs to be a youth voice. And I'm fully supportive of, you know, youth having a voice at as early an age as possible.
All right, I'll close. Thank you, Diane. It's been fantastic this afternoon. I think we've learned a huge amount, and it's interesting how actually our speakers are building on each other, because we've got Anne, First Nations. Next time we've got Alana Mountain, who's about how the fight for the forestry industry in Victoria to be closed down. And then in August we have actually got a education program about climate change in America for schools. Yeah, look, we really value your contribution and the thinking that is going on with all this. Like, yet again, we see you and other women who are contributing so much to the problems of the world at the moment in trying to find solutions. So we really thank you for all that work. And we look forward to your next project and getting you back for whatever that is.
Yeah, no, look, thank you very much. It's been great to participate today. And I might just throw something out there. In my bike riding group a couple of weeks ago, we had a big debate about Taylor Swift and her lyrics. And that might be worth getting in someone youthful to talk about the value of that new voice in music and some of the feminist messages in her lyrics.
Oh, that's food for thought.
Yeah.
Have to
We'll
listen
have
to.
to do our homework now.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
We'll be listening to Taylor Swift. So, Diane, you can either stay or you can go and do
Yeah,
your.
no, I'll depart. Thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
been
And I'll
fantastic.
forward the link to that article on tax and water and the link to having a look at my co-authored book. Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Jerry, Susie, Katie, and Yadranka, my co-authors.
Brilliant.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you
give them
so
our
much.
thanks for all their contributions too.
Okay, thanks. Cheers for
Bye.
now.
Brilliant. How interesting. So many different angles to look at things from. It was a really interesting discussion at the end. This is the photo of the book. I hope you can all see it now. So you've now got the title and where it is. You can get an online version as well as the hard copy. I've got the online one. And so I just want to go through some international news. We've been planning ahead for the next biennium, and as you're aware, in Zonta's strategic plan, Zonta Says Now is identified as our campaign for climate justice. But if you've probably seen the biennial goals paper that came out with the club mailing, you might have seen that. And basically, in our strategic plan, Zonta Says Now fits under Goal 1, credible and visible voice, and also a bit under Goal 4, where it sits with all our UN engagement actions. So when we're looking at the proposed biennial goals for 24-26, under Goal 1, the focus will be on advocacy in these areas: violence against women, climate justice, women in decision-making, and education equality. And a number of activities are identified to support this advocacy, including providing gender equity advocate training for Zontians so they know how to advocate, forming a working group for Zonta Says No. Here we go. We currently have one for Zonta Says Now, but we didn't have one for Zonta Says No, so that's being balanced up. Trying to get national voices for advocacy. So that's where the Zonta Australia will come in, but that's more about that later. Looking at our international service program, where we're focusing on areas where we can influence long-term systemic sustainable changes in countries. And we're looking at quarterly stakeholder newsletters. This is for non-Zontians, designed for those that support Zonta's programs, and currently they've always been a bit excluded from what goes on. Having a quarterly virtual advocacy series on specific areas that are important to Zonta, and transforming the remarkable Women Powerful Stories current video things to putting them as a podcast on a global platform. So that would be good. Also looking at having a signature event to end child marriage each year, because they were proposing that this become our signature service program. And then making our educational programs more appealing, meaningful, and beneficial. We've got someone in the waiting room. Beneficial for recipients. So, for example, they're looking at giving awardees a 1-year supporting Zonta membership, something like that. So as they get that extra benefit. All of these activities are shaped around 4 dates in the calendar year. So 8th of March, International Women's Day, Rose Day, focus on gender equality, women in decision making. 22nd of April is our Zonta Says Now Day. So that's Earth Day. So where we focus on climate justice and promote what we're doing in our think tanks. The 11th of October, the International Day of the Girl Child, is where they'd like to have the signature events and around ending child marriage and also promote education equality. And the 16 days of activism will obviously stay, because that's where we do all our work against violence against women, to end violence against women. And when we're looking at goal 4, so those all of those things all relate to goal 1, the credible voice. But goal 4 is where we're looking at engaging our audiences and allies. And that's where we want to improve and increase our communication with the United Nations, the African Union, Council of Europe, and all of our Zonta caucuses and unions and Zonta Australias, and where we've got those collated voices. So, and they want to have an advocacy partnership. So we want at least one global partnership in place by the end of 2025 and 2 other partnerships for joint statements. And Zonta International will also explore partnerships for the educational programs through mentoring or internships. So that's nice, maturing these programs. And we've never really promoted the CSW in Australia as much as we could. And I mean, really, this CSW, well, the NGO CSW is the COP for gender equality, if you think about it in that way. And that's where we're going to meet up with our like-minded organisations. So I know that with Zonta Says Now, we've participated in in 2 NGO CSW events. We've done those. But I think we could really work on that relationship more. I mean, this year's co-chair of the NGO CSW was Pamela Morgan, and she's a member of the Zonta Says Now working group. So we can explore how we can just get the information from the CSW back to our members, more easily. There are 4 international service projects proposed, but we'll only be implementing 3 of them. So delegates will vote yes or no for the first 2 projects, but I think they'll mostly vote yes. And the first proposal is to continue with phase 3 of the project to end child marriage in 12 countries. And this will really focus on how we can get it to be sustainable in the long term. And the second one is Climate Empower, is to reduce climate-induced gender-based violence in Madagascar, Mozambique and South Sudan. And this one's very much aligned with Zonta Says Now, as it educates women and girls to be agents of change to build community resilience. So the other 2 ones is the choice that Zonta members will get. And so they'll vote for one or the other. So the services for survivors of gender-based violence in Southeast Asia builds on the work done in PNG and Timor-Leste at the moment and sees the program expand to Cambodia and the Philippines. And the second one is called Laha, and it creates a virtual safe space for women and girls. And it's basically a web-based app designed to increase knowledge of gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health. And women and girls can look at the app for information and also use an interactive chat box to find answers and talk in a forum. And all the communications are moderated by trained gender-based violence specialists and trained counsellors from local partner organisations. And if the counsellors or moderators aren't around, they disable the chat, so it's a safe space. The app uses lots of pictures and videos to overcome literacy issues. It's currently in 7 languages, but through this project, they want to expand it to 20 languages. So I think it's going to be a hard choice for the delegates to choose between those. Then we've got the 3 Zonta Says Now events associated with convention. So to attend the pre-convention virtual workshop, members must be registered for the convention. And the topic for that one is Uniting for Climate Justice and Equality. And this is at in WA time, 9 p.m. on Friday, the 24th of May, which is 10:30 in South Australia and 11 p.m. in other states. This event is hosted by Zonta International, so it had to be in the office hours of Chicago. So we went as early as we could to try and make it accessible to us as many as possible. The face-to-face workshops on Thursday, the 27th of June, and is all about seeing if you and your community are disaster ready. It's already sold out. There's 195 in the workshop. So Angela Brockman from the USA and I are facilitating it. And if you what we're going to be doing is we'll be having discussion sessions within the workshop. So if you are going to the workshop, just drop it into the chat line, because we can make sure that we spread you around the room so you can help feed the discussions, so to speak. And we've also got a panel on the Sunday, the 30th of June, and Lisa Blair will be one of the keynote speakers. And she sailed around Antarctica in her sailing boat called Climate Action Now. And she took water samples for the Australian Institute of Marine Science. Every sample contained plastic, and nearly 2/3 of them were microfibers from textiles. And Lisa's currently sailing around New Zealand, and I think she's just broken the solo sailing speed record to New Zealand, and she's now circumnavigating New Zealand. The second panel member is Depecia Bougel, and I was speaking to her only a couple of days ago. She was an International Young Woman in Public Affairs awardee, and she spoke at the Hamburg Convention. She set up a not-for-profit business called Sparsa, which produces and sells compostable menstrual pads made from banana fiber. Wow. She's just amazing. She's actually now living in Bangladesh for a little while. She still works with her NGO part-time, but she's just started a university course which will help her with the business. And the facilitator for the panel is has yet to be confirmed. Now, our focus is on climate.
Carol, can I just say that panel is in the morning on Sunday, not in the afternoon?
Oh, it's in the morning now. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Judy. Our focus on climate justice, so it's useful to remind ourselves that what it is. And the Zonta magazine describes as putting gender equity and human rights at the core of decision-making and action on climate change. And the article also describes how the Zonta Says NOW working group was set up to implement the recommendations in Zonta's statement on climate change. Now, in the statement, there are the recommendations for governments and for members, and they're basically grouped into 5 areas: meeting our obligations under the Paris Agreement and increasing awareness of climate justice, educating girls and encouraging them to take up STEM careers and be part of the global response to climate change, involving more women in decision-making, so we have gender balance in governing bodies on environmental sustainability in particular, and enabling equal economic opportunities by addressing gender gaps in childcare, elder care, pay, anything basically that's a barrier to women participating fully and equally in the economy, and including women in disaster preparedness and planning so their needs are met. So this biennium, we focused on raising awareness of climate justice and disaster preparedness. And these recommendations are reflected in the 2 workshops that we're doing for convention. For the next biennium, we'll focus on involving more women in decision-making on environmental sustainability, and also look at how we can enable women's full and equal participation in the economy. Our presentation at the NGO CSW 68 helped to set the scene for the next biennium. So the last weekend, we held the first intercontinental think tank meeting at a friendly time for Australia, and wasn't that fun to be awake for one? It was great. We celebrated Earth Day, and Anne Paulina, I thought she was brilliant. And the video of her talk is online if you missed it. So what were your takeaways from her talk, for those that were there, because quite a few of you were there? Just let me know. What were your takeaways?
I thought she had a great strong message about reviving the consciousness of the First Nations people to the land, but that, talking about Mother Earth, and that, in a women's organisation, we're all mothers, and we all have that caring gene to look after things. But I think if you didn't get to see her, you should watch her the video, because she had a very strong message. And out of the chat room came a question about how could we be involved more in supporting First Nations women. And I don't know if Sue might mention a bit more of this, but her message was strongly, it's not about inviting them to join us, but about us going out to where they are and being involved. And I think that's an important message that sometimes Zontians forget about. And we have in our club an Indigenous seminar coming up in September. So you might want to talk about how you're going about that.
So I had been thinking about this before, but it certainly, Anne's talk certainly galvanised us. And we're actually going to do a forum on Hear Your Voice or Hear Their Voice, Indigenous women, deadly Indigenous women. So deadly in Indigenous language is basically, you know, successful. And from my time working in remote Indigenous communities, I saw how like people like Anne are just so important to their communities. They are real leaders. And a lot of us don't really understand how important they are. And Anne was saying 60% of Australians have never met an Indigenous person. Well, it's really something that's a loss for people. So we're going to go ahead and have an Indigenous forum of women who have been successful and how important they are to their communities and what they've done, and give people a chance to see in a positive light these people and their communities. And hopefully we're going to also raise money for an Indigenous scholarship for a woman, which is in the process of being worked out. But we're actually doing it in conjunction with Ivanhoe Girls Grammar School as well as an official school activity. So I'm going to be working with the girls there and giving them jobs to do and helping them to understand just how important the Indigenous part of their life is, because we're all Australians. And I think in New Zealand they've gone a step further, and even non-Maori people feel sort of Indigenous, they can relate to it. And we need to get to that point too.
After the talk, I actually had some emailing with Anne and asked her if there's any possibility of Zontians being able to go and meet with her in country and listen and walk with her in country. And she said that she'd be delighted to do something in that space. And she has this organisation called Madjula, and they actually do that. They're built for education of bringing and bridging cultures. But they have this walk trail that they use to share the story. But sadly, in the floods, it all got flooded away. And they reckon it's going to take 2 years to restore things to where they were because of the floods. But anyway, she said that she will keen to explore other ways of how we can keep in touch and build our relationship. So, but I think the initiatives you're doing are great. I know in our own club in Perth, we have the Yvonne Burgoo Education Awards that came out of our relationship with the Narrabeen women in the Kimberley region of Western Australia. And Yvonne Burgoo was our bridge between the two cultures. Well, she was an Indigenous senior law woman, but she was the real bridge between our club and her community. And in her honour, after she sadly died, we have the Yvonne Burgoo Education Award, which we do with Mamudij Aboriginal College, Health College. And it, in their culture, they didn't want one award for to celebrate one person. They prefer to share the award between a few people. So it actually goes to the women that are basically doing the best on the course which they have for Aboriginal health workers. So working in community. So
that's really interesting. Thanks, Carol.
It's a really good relationship how it's built up, hasn't it? Vicky is the president of our club. So saw you there, Vicky. I just yeah. So Vicky knows all about it. Yeah,
Sorry,
okay.
President. Sorry, what did you mean, Carol?
I should say Vicky Naser, who's in our meeting now. She's the president of the Zonta Club of Perth. And
Oh,
so
yes.
very behind all the what we're doing with the education awards and the Yvonne Burgoo Award in particular. So we're really trying to build our relationship with First Nations people.
It's
Anyway,
if I can just throw in one quick little comment. I taught some of the Burgoo girls when I was up in the Kimberley in the 80s. Yeah, so brings back special memories, and especially the Martuwarra River projects too as well. I've been working behind the scenes and giving my support to supporting that river campaigns. Yes, so it's very close to my heart.
Yeah. Well, I sent to Anne the story of our Nyarranyan friendship from the club, and because she loves stories, and I think she was very intrigued with all the different stages of that story as we went through the different programs, and eventually had the $250,000 from Lottery West that we were able to do the Yarriwadda project to improve the safety and the education of girls around Mowanjum community in particular. But it was a really good story. Anyway, moving on. We also launched the virtual art gallery at the meeting on the 22nd. And I don't know if you all saw it, but I'll just click into it so as you can actually see it. You'll notice that Sue's Oscar, we started one year with Oscar's poem, him reading the poem, didn't we? And so we have Oscar reading his poem and the poem that he had here at One Word Act. So I just wanted to show you a couple of the pictures that we have here. Sue sent through these photos of the Tarkeen trees with a description of how they're excellent carbon sink and how it's unprotected and threatened by mining, etc. We had, I think we had some interesting ones as well. We had some paintings, Forest Fire, Meter Mitra in Germany. And we also had, this one in Bulgaria, Sofia. They had a celebration of Zonta. But I'm going to have all these community events and dancing. I'm just moving to the end here because they did this. Where are we? Yeah. They all danced and they had all stood about the Zonta Now. It was a very interesting community event. So you don't know what you're going to get next. There was a calico banner. This banner was done in District 24 and at a community event, and everybody drew their pictures on the banner, which was a different thing. But I hope to encourage you all to go and have your time and just look through them. There was this one of the iceberg melting, you know, mesmerised. This is Jill Darby from Northern Suburbs, Perth Northern Suburbs Club. And it's just, you take the video and just the iceberg just starts to crumble and just starts to disappear. And by the end of the video, it's gone. But it just makes you realise how fragile our environment is. Oh, there it goes. The colours are amazing. But there it goes. Anyway, so we had all sorts of contributions that came through. And so we just had the 25 this year, which was the starting point. We had the Sunset Plane Ride, we had a poem with photos and, you know, how people are concerned about things. But just go to the virtual art gallery and you can have a good look in your own time. But anyway, so you'll see more of those. They'll go on the Hoover app, I think, at convention. So you'll be able to see them at your leisure. So did any of you have a little look at it? Did you like it? Think it's got legs? You could use it for future years? Because I want more people to provide entry. Yeah. So the hardest year is always the first year because people don't get it. But I'm hoping that in future years that we'll get far more uptake.
Well, it's really interesting to see, you know, people's different ways they view things. So.
Yeah, it's good. And there's so many different ways. I'm waiting for someone to do a cake. And so we can, you know, photograph the cake or a dance. I mean, Anne Paulina was talking about the importance of stories and dance in the healing of their people. And it sort of aligns so nicely with what we're trying to achieve in the virtual art gallery. So it can, you know, it's just a way of soothing the soul. But Zonta Australia, I mean, we've got Bridget online, haven't we? She's still, yes, yes, she's there. And so we were all hearing about this at our area workshops recently, Bridget. So, and you noticed today that I've sort of semi-branding today's think tank as an Australia think tank. So I figure that we only have to really remove the logos, and you know, we can actually be a Zonta Australian one.
Do you think possible?
So is there anything that you'd like to say to people here, as you're so intrinsically involved with it, like Bridget?
I think it's one where we have to continue the message strongly. And I was thinking this morning when we were at the domestic violence rally, Zonta's known so much for the campaign to say no to violence against women, but getting the same level of traction around the climate and the gender issues related to it, I think is still hard work in a sense. And I have somebody staying with me at the moment, and she said, "What's Zonta doing with climate change?" And I thought, oh my God, here's my story. It's early days, but I think, and Carol, this is up to you. It's been a huge journey for Zontans that you've taken us on, and thank you very much for that.
No, we're only at the start, but thank you.
And you wanted me to talk about Zonta Australia, didn't you?
Yes, yes. Is there anything you wanted to mention to anyone here?
So across the 3 districts, and all of you who live in Australia will know that we live in a federated model of democracy, which means that states generally do the service delivery, and the national government does the policy setting. But because Zonta is divided by districts, and we're not even really state by state, so it makes it difficult for us to have a unified and collective voice at the national level. So we've been doing some work over the last, it seems like forever, but it's really got traction in the last 12 months, where we've now got this, as you can see, the Zonta logo for Australia. It's been there for a long time with a very ordinary website, if any of you want to go and have a look at it. And this will be a committee that will form at the beginning of the next biennium, and it will really be an advocacy committee. So it will help with, as Zonta pivots much more strongly to advocacy, but will also give the 3 district governors that support mechanism at the national level to ensure that our voice is heard. And now it also strengthens our relationship with the ERA, for those of you who are familiar with that relationship. And it just gives that level of consistency, and I think added leverage for all the 2,000 Zontans across Australia.
That's good. No, excellent work, excellent work. Well, I figured that you're going to launch it at the convention, isn't that right, Bridget?
Yeah, so it won't actually be in the convention proper, because we're not that big to get a gig on the agenda. Thank you, Judy. But it is more that it's an opportunity with the 3 outgoing governors and the 3 incoming governors, and a whole lot of Zontans from around Australia, just to have a glass of champagne and celebrate the first step for that.
Sounds like a plan.
It is a plan.
And we could easily update all of the leaflets and things that we have and just put the new logo on them. Would people be happy with that?
I can send you that now.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
I'll get them moving. So now we're coming to meetings, right? Think tank meetings. Last year, our monthly intercontinental think tank meetings were at either 9 p.m. or 2 a.m. West Australian time, which wasn't good for anywhere else in the world, this part of the world. So at the beginning of the year, the Intercontinental Think Tank agreed to move the meetings to a 3-monthly rotation of times that suited North and South America, Europe and Africa, and Asia Oceania. And as you can see, the cycle from the dates shown here. So we've got May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January. And so previously, I would book the Intercontinental and the Australian think tanks on the same weekend, because I knew that no Australians were going to the Intercontinental because it was at an ungodly hour. So now it's a different story, and we may end up with the meetings being very close together. So what I want to do is just have a little discussion. So there's the Australian think tank meetings as to do we need to work on the meetings, or should we just ride the wave this year? That's basically where I'm up to. Any comments? Susan's got a tick on her thing. I don't know what the tick means, Susan.
It means I'm digitally illiterate, I beg your pardon.
Oh, no worries.
I cannot get.
I thought it was
cannot
me.
get
I
rid
didn't
of-
know what it meant.
No, it was really to investigate the way to use this screen, as I'm unfamiliar with it. So I apologise for that. I've been trying to
worries.
get rid of it.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
Thank
I'll
you.
see if I can.
So, Carol, we've already confirmed Alana Mountain for June the 15th.
Yes, that's fine. Yeah, that's okay. I mean, we'll ride what we can, but I just thought I'd.
All right. Sorry, Carol, I was agreeing. All right, if we go with what we've got so far, then.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So we can go with what we've got, but just be aware of it in the background. It's a legacy issue. Christine, did you have your finger up then? You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with. Anyway, doesn't matter. I think just go with it for this year, and before the end of the year, we'll look at next year's situation.
Yeah, fair enough. So I just thought I'd raise it with you, so as you're aware.
Oh, Carol, I'm just thinking, oh, sorry, yep.
Yeah.
October the 19th and October the 20th. It probably would be more sensible with that one to, because
Combine
it's the Asia Oceania time, to combine that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just so close together that.
Yeah. Now with the October meeting, because it's the Asia Oceania, well, what I'm looking at doing is setting up little teams that will overview the hosting of those meetings. So as we get people that are from North and South America rotating the stories and hosting the meetings for that one, Europe and Africa, and Asia and Oceania for us. Now, because we need to share with Asia on those things. So I was thinking that we have Mari in the Philippines and Dilruba in Bangladesh, for example, who we could perhaps team up with to sort out a program that's reflective of the international nature of what we do. So we'll need to make sure if we could have an Asia Oceania meeting that's hosted by Bangladesh, for example. And then if the next day or whatever, we have an Australian meeting, it's really on how frequently you would like your Australian updates. Did I explain myself very well there?
I agree with Sue. I wouldn't put the Australian, our think tank, and the international one in our time on around about, a day apart. I think if people are, giving up time to be there, that might, even if it's a week apart, might be a bit easier.
I probably would just combine the two. That I think that.
I'll combine them into one meeting.
People to look at the intercontinental then.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
I see. Yeah, that's
for
a
October.
Just do one.
For October, we just have October the 20th. So we just cancel
that would be good.
The 19th.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll do that one. And the other ones aren't so bad, are they? Oh, we got Europe, Africa on the 15th, and we've got ours on the 14th here. This one is 8 o'clock your time, 8 or 9 o'clock in the Eastern States. So at night, and this one is in the morning. So this one is 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's pretty like people at 8 o'clock could be looking at it from Australia fairly easily, can't they?
So we'll be looking at this one on the 14th, the Saturday the 14th. That would be at the moment.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking trying to do December again too, particularly close to Christmas. It might be better just to say December the 14th again. The times are okay, so I think people could.
So basically, we just have the June the 15th and the August the 17th meetings, and perhaps we might organise a different meeting in between the two instead of the October and December ones. Because the times which we have, because we've got November the 17th, which is the middle of the night for all of us, okay? So for the USA one, so instead of having the October and December, we could perhaps have something in November, at the end of November, and that'll just sort of set the team and then lead it from there.
Yeah, it's possible.
We could have something at, say, the 23rd of November, something like that. And then that would put us, that's the last, oh, we could, yeah. Or the 30th of November, the last Saturday of that November month. And that would just do us for the end of the year. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Yep, I think
Get me?
that's okay.
So we'll have June, August, and the end of November as Australian think tank meetings. Okay. I'll adjust the things to that. So anyway, so that would overcome this year, and we can plan it again for next. Just want you to be aware that with this one, the Senate Standing Committee's report has been extended again, and it's now due on the 3rd of June. So it's gone from February to March to April and now June. We talked about the 25 proposals for new and expanded coal mines awaiting government approval. And it's really sad that 2/3 of young Australians say have climate concerns. It's having a negative impact on youth mental health. And in District 23, we have a mental health first aid district project, and this is something that you might want to consider in other states, as it's really like a Zonta Says NOW aligned project because of climate change and mental health issues. Anyway, have a think about it. And other business, oh yeah, this report, babies versus plastics. I was reading this the other day. It was put out by earthday.org, a very good primer on the problems with microplastics. And it's basically, they found plastics everywhere, you know, in our environment and in our bodies, and the babies come off worst. And they're showing this, all these medical studies they have are really disturbing. And this quote by Kathleen Rogers, I think, sort of sums it up. And she says at the end here, are we just hoping they are safe? Or is it even the remotest possibility they might be toxic, so terrifying that we can't contemplate it? Makes you wonder. Anyway, in the report, they have one chapter entitled Welcome to the Plasty Scene, that I thought was an amazing use of words. Amazing. So I did laugh. But we desperately need a strong global plastics treaty, and the UNEP is working on this. And one of our Zonta Says Now working group members, Joan Kabiyambi in Uganda, is Zonta International's representative at these global plastics treaty discussions. So I just thought you'd like to know. And this next picture is Esther Duflo. She's the youngest winner of a Nobel Prize for Economics, which she won in 2019 at the age of 46. And she suggested taxing global corporations an extra 5%, and the world's top 3,000 billionaires an extra 2%, to raise money for climate adaptation in countries that are most impacted by the climate crisis. And the funds would be sent directly to the poorest individuals in those countries to help them prepare for climate disasters. The two climate taxes combined could raise up to 400 billion per year for a loss, damage and adaptation fund that Diane was talking about earlier. Esther is quite unique because she sees economics as a human science, and she's got a research lab called the Poverty Lab, and she gives money directly to the poor people in her research. So she gave money directly to people affected by floods in Bangladesh, and they were able to leave their lands before the lands got flooded with their cows and what have you. So they didn't have to spend money recovering for aid because they were able to help themselves. I think it was $50, $58 each or something like that she gave them. Amazing. We have all said the good news, the human rights work that went through in Switzerland, the 2,500 Swiss older women who were successful in their action in the European Court of Human Rights. The Swiss government had not done enough about global warming, and this was putting the women's health at risk from heat waves. The action took 9 years to come to conclusions. good on them. And then closer to home, the government has deferred necessary reforms to the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, put them off indefinitely in the face of pressure from the WA government and the mining and resources industries. But they're still going ahead with those two national agencies for Environmental Protection Australia and the Environmental Information Australia. So it looks like we're back to business as usual until the next election. And it's so sad. But on the plus side, at least we're trying to make headway on vehicle emission standards. And I just had to share this video with you from the Climate Council.
What a news!
Oh, let me just stop that and make sure I've got the sound shared. Okay, come back here. Oh, come on. Right, I just moved my thing forward.
What a new box that other countries don't allow on their roads? Then come on down to Big Auto's Aussie Dumping Ground. The biggest brands are taking a dump in Australia because this is pretty much the last place they can. Right, fellas? Right. We've got Toyotas that are so polluting, they'll make you say, I want a feeling. And that feeling is emphysema. We've got Hondas so dirty, they should have their own OnlyFans page. And we've got Mazdas that are so expensive to run, the only thing that'll go zoom zoom is your wallet. We can edit him out, right? The rest of the world introduced fuel efficiency standards years ago. The USA, Europe, Japan, New Zealand, China. That's why Big Auto are sending all their boxes here to Australia. At Big Auto's Aussie Dumping Ground, we have no standards. Big Auto's Aussie Dumping Ground has a wide selection of cars, utes and lobbyists. Look, this one's second-hand. He comes from Big Oil. Let's get him started.
It's too soon to make cars cleaner. We've only been given 40 years' notice. It's too soon to make cars cleaner. We've only been given 40 years' notice.
Such a classic. At Big Auto's Aussie Dumping Ground, you can hear BS like that all day long. Why? Because we're hiding behind the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries, a lobby group for car companies that a whole bunch of car companies quit because the lobby group is so full of even a Hilux couldn't tow it. So come on down to Big Auto's Aussie Dumping Ground and you can drive away with much more to pay. In petrol and lung disease and the burning planet and so on and so forth.
I just couldn't resist it.
You better not show that one at convention, Carol.
Oh, I'll be too tempted. We'll have a sneaky version under the counter.
Well,
No,
it's us in a bad light.
I just thought it's brilliant, the power of comedy and getting the message across. Isn't that great? Anyway, so at this stage of the meeting, I usually plug the foundation, but I just wanted you to draw your attention to the fact that at convention, we will be having the donation boards, I presume, Julie. So as we put our stickers on. So every district, you go and make your individual donations to the foundation, you get a sticker and you put your sticker against your district. And you can see how some districts, you know, have made some really good pictures. In Hamburg, there weren't very many of us. So we didn't really have enough to make big pictures. So hopefully this year we will. So spend up big, ladies, for the foundation. And so with what we're doing, we will make life better for Debor, Ayan, Claire, Judith, Maria, and millions of girls worldwide can look forward to a sustainable, fairer, gender equal future. And we're talking about our next meeting on Saturday, the 15th of June. We'll keep these two meeting dates, the next two. And we've got Alana Mountain speaking to us. And she's just amazing what she does. So it'd be great to have the update on how she's going. And that's it. Finally, thank you very much for all participating today. And I look forward to us meeting as the Australian think tank on the 15th of June. So thank you very much.
Carol, could you just send us that video? It's just so fantastic.
Oh, yes, I will share the link for the video. And it's all on the Climate Council website. They've got quite a few on there. It's great. Okay. Any other questions? Comments? No? Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much. I'll see you later.
Good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.